Hello and welcome to this session. I'm Raghav and today we are going to learn about config elements in JMeter. So this is going to be very easy, very interesting, and we will look at different config elements present in JMeter. And to start with, let us see what exactly config elements are. So these are the elements that are used to do any configuration for the sampler elements. And if you go to the official website of JMeter, so I will go to the Apache JMeter official website. And here I will go to the user guide. So let me go to the website first, which is jmeter.apache.org. And if I go to the user manual here, and if you go down under section 18, we have component reference, and here 18.4 is configuration elements, and you can see configuration elements can be used to set up defaults and variables for later use by samplers. And one thing to note is that these elements are processed at the start of the scope in which they are found. So for example, before any samplers in the same scope. So we will learn what exactly this means, and this is what config elements are. Let me also copy this definition and put it in the notes, and all these notes will be available to you. So this is what configuration elements are. Now I will go to my JMeter, and here we will create a new test plan, and you can see we have a new test plan. And if you do a right click on the test plan and go to add, you will find this option of config element, and we have so many config elements in JMeter. So we have CSV Data Set Config, HTTP Header Manager, and so on. So let us start with the CSV Data Set Config, and this is what the editor looks like. And I will also add a thread group, and inside the thread group I am just going to add a sampler. So I will just add a very simple request, and I will add a Java request here. So now coming back to the CSV dataset config, so this is the configuration element which is used to set data from CSV file. So here you can create a CSV file. I will just create a sample CSV file here. Let me go to my desktop, and I will say new. I can create a new text document here, and I will say this is data1 and save this as extension .csv, and yes. And if I open this CSV file, I can now give my values here. So for example, I want first name and last name, so I will say first name, last name. These are the two variables, and the values here, for example, I say this is the first value, then I say we have second value, and I say we have this value. So we have these three values, and these are the variables, first name and last name. So now what I can do is I will just save and close this CSV file, and now I will go to my CSV dataset config and browse to this location. So this is present in my desktop, and this is the file, and I have provided a location. And then you can provide the variables if you want to override or if you do not want to use it from the CSV, but in my CSV file the first row is variable, so I'm just keeping other things as it is. And here in the request I'm just going to use the values from my CSV file. So I will say this is request, and I will say dollar and curly braces. This is the format for referring the variables, and we have learned this already. So I will say first name, and then again dollar curly braces last name. So I am referring these two variables from the CSV file here. And now I will add a listener. I will add a view results tree listener to see the results. And let me just try to run this. I can also save this. I will save this in the JMeters folder, or let me just save this on the desktop itself, and I will name this as CSV config.jmx and save, and I will run this, and you can see it has referred the first value, which is Raghav Pal, from the CSV file. Now in case we have more iteration, I will say 3 iterations here, and now if I run this, you can see it is now referring all these values from the CSV file. I can also increase the user count and make the iteration as 1, and if I now again try to run this, you can see for every user it is referring to a new row from the CSV file. So this is how you can use the CSV dataset config, although also there is other fields, and there is a separate tutorial on this. I will provide the link in the description. So this was about the CSV dataset config. Now let me open a new test plan and show you some other config elements. So we also have HTTP header manager, HTTP cookie manager, HTTP cache manager. These all are used for HTTP requests. So to learn or to understand all the use of all these config elements, let us record a very quick HTTP scenario. So I'm going to my browser Chrome, and I have added this BlazeMeter plugin on Chrome. And again, this is a separate session. In case you do not know how to use, you can just add the BlazeMeter Chrome plugin, and then using this Chrome plugin I am going to record a scenario for JMeter. So I'm just going to go to this Orange HRM website, and I will do a login scenario. So let me first click on the BlazeMeter icon here, and here I'm just going to say this is JMeter test 1, and I will click on the record button, and I will go to this website, and then you can see the username is admin and password is admin123. I will add this admin and admin123 and click on the login button, and it logs in. I will now click on this welcome admin and hit logout, and it will log out from the application. And now I'm going to stop this recording, and if I go again to the BlazeMeter, I can save this, or I can also go to edit. It will show me all the steps, and then I can select to save it as a .json or a .jmx. So I am going to save this as a .jmx file, and it will now start exporting our recorded scenario as a .jmx file. And yes, it is here. So let me show this. We have this here. Let me copy it from here and take it to my Windows system where I have my JMeter open, and I'm just going to paste it here, and you can see JMeter test.jmx is here, and I will go to my JMeter, and I'm just going to open it from here. And yes, you can see we have got our request here, and all the samplers are here. I can add a listener. I will just add a view results tree listener here so that I can see the result, and I'm going to run this. So let us see the result here. So we are getting successful response of the first request sampler, and it is still running. So let us just wait for this run to be completed. So the second request failed, and this is some PHP request, I think. Okay, so the others are pass and the second one is failed. Let me just disable. I'm not sure if we need this. Let me disable and check if we are still getting a successful response. I will run this again. So this is our first request, and then yes, so we are getting everything is okay. Now if you see, by default BlazeMeter has also added all these config elements for the HTTP request, and you can see here we have HTTP header manager. So this is used in case you have any headers for your HTTP request, whether you are using a website or an API. If you are having any headers in the request, you can put all the headers here. You can add it from here. We have a add button at the bottom, and delete as well, and then you can keep on adding your headers. We have user defined variables. In case you have any user defined variables or any variables you want to define or to use in your test, you can define them here. You can click on this add button. It will create a new row, and you can define. For example, here it has added a variable by the name base URL1, and the value is the domain name of Orange HRM website. And if you see in the request, you can see the variable is being referred from here. The variable is being referred here. So this is how you can use user defined variables config element. We also have HTTP request default. Now HTTP request default is for your HTTP request. If you want to have some default values that will be used for all your HTTP request samplers, you can put it here. So for example, in our case, you can see in all these requests the server name or IP is the same. So you can see all the server name is IP same. So what I can do is I can take this, cut it from here, and I will put it into HTTP request default here, and from the request samplers I am going to delete this. So from all the request samplers I'm just going to delete this, and this should be referred from the HTTP request default. So if I delete from everything, all the samplers, I still should get positive response. So I'm running this again and let us see, and you can see it is still running. So we are still getting all the response as earlier because it is now being referred from HTTP request default. Now we have DNS cache manager. So this is for managing the cache, and if I take you to the documentation for DNS cache manager, let us see what does this official documentation says. The DNS cache manager element allows to test applications which have several servers behind load balancers. When user receive content from different IPs, by default JMeter uses JVM DNS cache. So basically it is to manage the cache in case you are using load balancers in your application. So this is what you can use it for. And similarly we have authorization manager, cookie manager, and cache manager. So authorization manager is in case you have some username and passwords or any authorization, you can add it here. So you can click on add, it will create a new row and you can add your authorization. And you can see here we have basic, digest, and Kerberos and all these mechanisms. And then the cookie manager is for clearing cookies, and in case you have any user defined cookies, you can add it here. You can also select the cookie policy, and if you want to clear all the cookies on each iteration, you can check this. In case of cache, you can select clear cache on each iteration, and also maximum number of elements in the cache. This can be selected here. Now also if you take any of the templates, so let me just go to templates, and here I will say I will use a template here. So I will say build an advanced web test plan and say create. So you can see when we use a HTTP template, we get this HTTP request default, user defined variables, cookie manager, header manager, and all these config elements. So you can use all these config elements in your JMeter whenever you are using any HTTP request. So this was all about the HTTP config elements. Let me go to a new test plan and let us see the other config elements. So we have seen all this HTTP. We have a config element called counter. Now if you see the counter config element here, we can set some starting value and the maximum value and the increment count. So let us say if I say starting value is 1, increment is for 3, and let us say maximum value is 20. Now here I can also give any variable name. So for example, I say num, and if I now create a thread group, I will add a thread group, and inside the thread group I'm going to add a sampler Java request, and here I'm just going to refer the variable. I will say $, and under curly braces the variable name which is num. And to see the result, I'm going to add a listener view results tree, and I will run this. So I will just save this. I will say this is counter config element, and yes, and you can see it has started with 1. Now if I increase the iteration or users, let me just increase the iteration to 5, and I will run this again, and you will see 1, 4, 7, 10, 13. So it is incrementing by 3, and the maximum it will go is up to 21. So just in case I have more iteration, I will just say 8 iterations, and now I will try to run this again. So 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 19, and because it cannot go beyond 20 because that was the maximum value we have set, it is then again starting from 1. So in case in any of your test plan you need some kind of a counter with some specific intervals, you can use the counter config element. So I will just delete this and let us see some other config element. So we have seen counter, DNS cache manager we have already seen. We have FTP request default. So FTP request default is used to set configuration for FTP request sampler. So if you go to your thread group and go to the samplers, you will see we have a FTP request sampler. So for setting up the default values for this, we can use FTP request default. So I will again delete this and let us see some other config element. So we have the next one is authorization manager we have seen. Now JDBC connection configuration is important, and this is used for setting up the database connection whenever we are using any JDBC sampler or JDBC preprocessor or post processors. And you can see here we are setting all the connections. So the database URL, the driver class, username, password, everything will be set here. And for all the JDBC elements, for example, if you go to sampler, you will find a JDBC request. So here you can see we have JDBC request here. So you can see here we are not setting up the connection. Here we are just giving the JDBC request like the SQL statements. The connection will be set here. Similarly, if you go to your preprocessors and post processors, in the preprocessor we have a JDBC preprocessor, and similarly in the post processor we also have a JDBC post processor, and all this will take the connection from our JDBC connection configuration config element. So this was JDBC connection configuration, and then we have, let us go again to our config element, and we have Java request default. Again, this is for our Java request. So here you can see in this connection, in this configuration element, we can put some default values. We can also add some more parameters, and we can set some defaults for our Java request. If I go to the next config element, which is Keysto configuration. Now Keysto configuration is used for managing the Keysto, which is a store for security certificates. And also if you go to the documentation, you can see here on the default official documentation page, the Keysto configuration element lets you configure how Keysto will be loaded and which keys it will use. So whenever you are doing some HTTPS scenario where you want to maintain or manage the key store, you can use this configuration element. So I'm not going very deep into this, and let me just show you another config element. So we have now LDAP extended request defaults and LDAP request defaults will be used for their corresponding samplers. So if you go to the samplers, let me just show you. If I go to the samplers, we have LDAP request and LDAP extended request. So for both of these requests, you can set configuration through their corresponding config elements. And then if I see another config element, we have login config element. Now this is for doing the login. You can set the username and password, and if you want to set up any login configuration, you can set it here. Again, if you go to the documentation of this particular config element, the login config element lets you add or override username and password settings in samplers that use username and password as part of their setup. So if you want to override, you can use the login config element. Now I will again do a right click on test plan, go to add config element, and then we have random variable. Now here again you can put some minimum value and maximum value. So I say 1 and 10, and then output variable I will say random number, and then I can use this in any of my requests. So I will take this one up, and in the request, I'm just going to refer this variable. So I'm saying dollar, and between curly braces I'm saying random num, which is the variable name. And if I will set iteration to 5 and go to view results tree and run this, and let us see. So you can see we are getting some random numbers between 1 to 10, 2, 6, 3, 2, 5. If I run this again, I will get some other set 7, 8, 5, 3, 1. Now if you go to random variable config element, we have this seed for random function. So you can give some value here, and now what will happen is it will generate the same random numbers on each run. So for example, I run this now. So these are random numbers 9, 3, 1, 8, 10. But if I run this again, so you can see 9, 3, 1, 8, 10 is what it has used. If I run this again, it is again using the same numbers 9, 3, 1, 8, 10. Now this is useful when you want to debug or troubleshoot, or whenever you want to reproduce your scenario, you want to check it with the same numbers. So in that case, you can put a seed value here. So this was about random variable config element. And if I see the others, we have simple config element. Now simple config element just is a key value pair. So you can set some key and its value, and you can put into this simple config element. If you go to the documentation of simple config element, it says lets you add or override arbitrary values in samplers. You can choose the name of the value and the value itself, and here is this how you can use it. So this was a very simple config element. I'm just going to delete this, and I will do a right click on test plan, add config element, and we have TCP sampler config. This is used for the TCP sampler. So if I go to the sampler, if I do a right click on thread group and add sampler, you can see we have a TCP sampler, and the TCP config element is used for setting configuration for this sampler. And let me just see. Now we also have user defined variables. Now user defined variables is a very simple config elements where you can keep on adding any user defined values, and we have already seen this in our earlier example where we recorded through BlazeMeter. We can put any user defined value here and its value, and then refer it into any of our test elements. And then you can see there are some other Chrome driver, Firefox driver. These are the config elements that you get when you add the Selenium WebDriver sampler, and this is to set the configuration for that particular browser. So for example, if I'm using Chrome, I have to give the path for Chrome driver, and this I've covered in a separate session as well. And this will be available to you only when you add the Selenium WebDriver plugin into your JMeter. So this is some extended config elements, and this is how you can use the JMeter config elements. I hope this session was very useful for you. Thank you for watching.